What would you do if your boss demanded you follow every single company policy to the letter? And then you discovered that following one policy meant you had to break another. James had been working as a senior quality assurance analyst at a large pharmaceutical company for over 8 years. He was known for his meticulous attention to detail and his unwavering commitment to following procedures. His boss, a man named Richard, was obsessed with compliance. Richard had been brought in by upper management to tighten the company's quality control processes after a minor regulatory violation that had cost the company a significant fine. Richard's motto was simple: follow the policy, no exceptions. James had no problem with this at first. He had always been a rule follower, and he appreciated the clarity that Richard's policies provided. But over time, Richard's obsession became increasingly absurd. He implemented new policies almost weekly, each one more restrictive than the last. He required that every single step of every single process be documented in triplicate. He demanded that all employees attend mandatory compliance training sessions every month. He even instituted a policy that required employees to use a specific brand of pen when filling out forms, because he believed that other brands might smudge or fade over time. James began to notice that some of Richard's policies were contradictory. One policy required that all quality assurance tests be completed within 48 hours of a batch being produced. Another policy required that all test results be reviewed by 2 independent analysts before being submitted. James pointed out to Richard that it was often impossible to complete both steps within the 48-hour window, given the volume of work. Richard dismissed his concerns and told him to make it work. He reiterated that there were no exceptions to any policy. James decided to take Richard at his word. He would follow every single policy to the letter, no matter what the consequences. If a policy said that he had to document every step of a process, he would document it. If a policy said that he had to use a specific pen, he would use that pen. And if a policy said that he had to complete tests within 48 hours, he would complete them, even if it meant cutting corners on other parts of the process. First few weeks of James's malicious compliance went unnoticed. Richard was too busy implementing new policies to pay attention to what James was actually doing. But then, the quality control department began to fall behind schedule. Batches of product were being held up because James's test results were incomplete. Other departments began to complain about the delays. Richard called James into his office to ask what was going on. James calmly explained that he was following every single policy that Richard had implemented. He explained that the policy requiring tests to be completed within 48 hours was taking precedence over the policy requiring independent review because he could not complete both within the time frame. He also explained that he was documenting every step of the process as required, but that this was also slowing things down. Richard was furious. He told James that he was being deliberately obtuse and that he needed to use his common sense. James replied that Richard had told him there were no exceptions to any policy and that he was simply following orders. Richard was unable to argue with this logic. Over the next few months, James continued to follow every policy to the letter. He completed tests within 48 hours, but he did so by skipping the independent review, which meant that his results were more likely to contain errors. He documented every step of the process, but he did so in such exhaustive detail that it slowed down the entire department. He used the specific brand of pen that Richard had mandated, but he made sure to point out to Richard every time he had to stop working because his pen had run out of ink. The quality control department ground to a halt. Batches of product were piling up, and the company was losing money. Upper management began to ask questions. Richard was forced to admit that his policies had created a bottleneck. He was also forced to admit that he had been unwilling to listen to the concerns of his employees. Richard was eventually reassigned to a different department. His replacement, a woman named Helen, quickly reversed many of his policies. She simplified the documentation requirements, relaxed the 48-hour deadline, and allowed employees to use any brand of pen they preferred. She also made a point of listening to the concerns of her employees. James continued to work at the company. He was promoted to a supervisory position, and he made a point of treating his employees with respect. He never forgot the lesson that Richard had taught him, that policies are only effective if they are practical, and if they are implemented with common sense. James's story is a powerful reminder that compliance should never be an end in itself. Policies are meant to serve a purpose, and if they are not achieving that purpose, they should be changed. It is also a reminder that sometimes the best way to expose the flaws in a system is to follow its rules so literally that the system breaks. What would you do if your boss demanded you follow policies that were clearly impractical? Would you try to point out the flaws, or would you follow the policies to the letter and let the consequences speak for themselves? And how much frustration are you willing to endure before you decide to take a stand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else to challenge the system.